Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's special lecture on elimination of violence against women. 25th November world over is marked as a special day marking, highlighting the elimination of violence against women, which is all pervasive. First of all, let me clarify that any kind of violence is a human rights violation. So, violence against women and girls is a grave violation of human rights which is prevalent even today across the world, both in the developed as well as the developing countries. Women and girls are subjected to different forms of abuse, whether it is emotional, physical, sexual, because of their gender. This affects not only their sense of security, health, dignity, but also autonomy. Gender-based violence has lifelong repercussions on the victims as well as their families. According to the UN, about 1 in 3 women across the world has experienced sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. Among the many forms of violence that women face, spousal violence is widely prevalent in India and world over. Another very important and related concept is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is an umbrella term for any harmful act that is perpetrated against a person's free will and that is based on socially ascribed, that is gender differences between different sexes. Gender-based violence includes several acts that inflict physical, sexual or mental harm or any kind of suffering or threats of such acts, coercion and other deprivations of liberty. These acts can occur both in public as well as in private. So, when we are talking about the term violence against women, it is described in the United Nations Declaration on the elimination of elimination of violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual or psychological harm or any kind of suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether it is occurring in public or in private domain. So, an important question that arises is that does gender-based violence only relate to women or even men are included in it? While the term gender-based violence is used to describe some forms of violence against men and boys also, most acts of gender-based violence are directed against women and girls because in many contexts they are disadvantaged in terms of social power and influence or control over resources or even control over their own bodies and participation in public life. So, therefore, definitely females are more vulnerable to violence and hence as an umbrella term, this is what it denotes. Then gender-based violence is happening everywhere and is underreported worldwide due to several fears of stigma or retaliation, also limited availability of trusted service providers and also impunity for perpetrators, which is again a grave cause of concern. There are also huge safety and ethical challenges that are involved in collecting data pertaining to prevalence in times of crisis. Now, let us share some facts which kind of further clarify that how gender-based violence can be understood in numbers. So women aged 15 to 44 years of age are more at risk from rape and domestic violence than from cancer, motor accidents, war, malaria or other deadly diseases, according to World Bank data. Worldwide, up to 6 in 10 women have suffered physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and most of this violence takes place within the intimate relationships, with many women reporting their husbands or partners as the perpetrator, as has been pointed out by UN Women Fact Sheet. Globally, 603 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not yet considered a crime. Today, almost 125 countries have specific laws that penalize domestic violence. However, violence against women remains one of the most widespread human rights violations, yet one of the least prosecuted crimes, as has been reported by UN Women Fact Sheets. Even in the developed world, for example in Europe, 12 to 15% of women face violence in their home every day, and over 60 million girls are child brides, and some 100 to 140 million girls and women have experienced female genital mutilation or cutting, as has been reported by UNICEF. More than 6 million women and girls are trafficked across borders each year, the vast majority for sexual exploitation. So, when we are talking about difference between gender-based violence and violence against women, a point that emerges is that gender-based violence is still an emerging term, but is the technical wording of the UN. There are a number of differences also that exist between the two terminologies. Originally, it was used to replace the term male violence against women, because the word woman in that context refers to both individuals of the female sex and to feminine gender roles in society. So, UN's preference for gender-based violence intends to emphasize that violence against women is a phenomenon that is related to the gender of both victim as well as perpetrator. So, there is a need to look at violence from this holistic perspective. Several definitions continue to focus solely on the fact that women are victims of violence. However, the UN texts extending the definition to all forms of violence that are related to social expectations and social positions based on gender and not conforming to a socially accepted gender role is an important point of reference. Violence against women is a chosen action against a woman or a girl child simply because of her gender, because she is female. So, violence against women cuts across race, religion, income, class, culture, etc. It is deeply embedded in all the cultures, so that millions of women have considered it as a way of life and have been silently accepting it as their fate. So, violence against women is a grave violation of human rights, which is prevalent even today across the world. They are subjected to different forms of abuse, and there is no end to it. This not only affects their health, their dignity and autonomy, but it also has very disturbing impact on the entire family also. So, according to UN, while about 1 in 3 women across the world has experienced some kind of violence in their lifetime, the governments of several countries are still falling short of taking necessary action. So, the COVID-19 pandemic has further accelerated this epidemic of violence and has forced several countries and states to impose lockdowns, leading to a global surge in domestic violence directed towards women and girls. Such instances of increase in domestic violence or spousal violence have also increased in India. Multiple factors such as alcohol, drug abuse, sense of entitlement, etc. contribute to domestic violence. And in fact, every 3 seconds there is a child bride in the world, and 1 of 3 girls in developing countries, excluding China, is likely to marry before the age of 18. There were 14.1 million child brides in 2012, and most of these girls are poor, less educated, and live in rural areas. As per the data between 2010 to 2020, 30,000 girls under 18 would have been married each day. So, early marriage leads to higher mortality, problems related to health, school dropout, childbearing before reaching maturity, and this also must be considered as violence against females. Pregnancy and birth complications are the main cause of death among adolescent girls ranging between 15 to 19 years in several developing countries. So, as we are talking about trafficking in persons, then the global report, what does it indicate? It indicates that 83% countries have trafficking in person legislation. However, 16% are no convictions and 23% 1 to 10 convictions, whereas in 34% of the cases there are no prosecutions. Forced labor in Africa is another big issue, and there is a huge flow from East Asia also to several countries. Often victim is prosecuted and employer is freed. So, this again is a major problem. The root causes need addressing, for example, labor demand, poverty, issues of inequality, unequal access to resources, and finally the laws of the land. An equally important issue when we are talking about violence is violence against children. So, across the world, violence affects millions of children who are working legally as well as illegally. And both these issues, that is violence against women as well as children and child labor, are closely related. According to UN study on violence against children, there are high incidences of violence in workplace, including ill treatment by employers and sexual violence of child workers. And of all the settings where the children are exposed to violence, the workplace is among the most difficult to address, and here again the root cause is poverty and illiteracy. What are the key characteristics of any act of gender-based violence? First of all, it involves abuse of power by the perpetrator. It could be a teacher, it could be a husband, a worker, or any person who is more powerful than the victim. It involves some type of force, including threat or coercion. Also, there is a lack of informed consent, and it is also a violation of fundamental human rights. There are different types of gender-based violence, like the sexual violence, which includes rape, attempted rape, forced pregnancy or abortion, forced prostitution, sexual harassment or abuse, as well as sexual exploitation. If we talk about physical violence, it includes domestic violence or assault in public. Then psychological violence would include verbal or emotional abuse, humiliation, discrimination, any kind of confinement, or denial of opportunities or access to services. Then we cannot neglect another kind of violence, and that is economic violence, which means denial of access to money within the household. Also, harmful traditional practices, which include sexual, physical and psychological violence, all going hand in hand. For example, female genital mutilation or harm to men's genitals, or forced early marriage, or widow killings, and the so-called honor killings, which have been part and parcel of so many traditional societies. So, domestic violence or intimate partner violence can involve any type of violence that I have just now discussed. Now, coming to the scope of the problem, gender-based violence is serious, life-threatening and global. So, during humanitarian emergencies, gender-based violence is known to increase. For example, during the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, it is estimated that between 250,000 and 5 lakh women survived rape. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, as per a study conducted in 2011, 48 women were raped every hour. Gender-based violence refers to all kind of harmful acts directed at an individual due to their gender. It's a serious violation of all kinds of rights, and as I just mentioned, it is very much life-threatening and is a major health issue, because the issue involved here is not only biological but also psychological, which has a huge impact on a person's personality. During displacement and times of crisis, the threat of gender-based violence significantly increases for women and girls. But again, it is a fact that gender-based violence is preventable, and UNHCR is committed to promoting gender equality and human rights, and to protecting refugees and other persons of concern from this kind of violence. Now, I would be discussing what were the historical shifts if we focus on India, and how one can trace existence of violence even in the past. The shift to an agricultural economy and the second urbanization between 800 BCE to 600 BCE was marked by the emergence of caste and class divisions. The upper varnas became aware of their special rights, and they used force to get their demands met, and as a result, patrilineal succession became the norm, and it became fairly well established in Indian society. And with this patrilineal control came very rigid controls. The collapse of tribal economy and polity in the post-Vedic period, especially with the establishment of private control over land held and transmitted within a patrilineal system, accompanied by several other socio-cultural changes, and also kind of facilitated by kingship and various rules pertaining to hereditary kingship, completed the game. The preservation of caste purity meant that the sexual behavior of certain categories of women needed to be closely guarded. So, wives in particular required to be under male control. Various dharam shastras, sutras, epics, etc. From 6th century BCE started underlining rules that a husband should ensure that no other man goes near his wife, lest his seed gets into her. So, the rules and regulations, they became very strict, and as has been pointed out by Uma Chakravarti, the patrilineal and patriarchal control over a woman's sexuality in a caste divided society brought out connections between caste, class, patriarchy and the state in the religious and secular literature of ancient India. Several historians have tried to unearth the concept of female seclusion as it has been described in ancient Indian literature. The rigidities of caste structure could be maintained by establishing female seclusion, as women, due to their reproductive functions, were the entry points into the caste system. The intermingling of caste, class and gender stratification strengthened patriarchy in early India. So, it is not as if patriarchy became stronger in recent times or after independence. In fact, the beginnings had been made from early India onwards. So, as we are talking about evolution of patriarchy, the lower caste male was a threat to the upper caste purity and thus had to be lawfully stopped from developing sexual relations with women of the upper castes, and this could be accomplished by closely guarding women, as has been pointed out by Veena Das. However, once the cohabitation of inter-caste males and females took over, it came to be described as the beginning of Kali Yuga, when upper caste women and low caste men abdicated their duties. So, women's sexual subordination became part of the gender discourse that was implicit in the religious law codes, and it was implemented by the authority of the state. A sharp distinction required to be made between motherhood and female sexuality, with the latter being channelized only into legitimate motherhood within a tightly controlled structure of reproduction which ensured caste purity and patrilineal succession. So, female sexuality had to be managed legally or through force by using violence. Then one must also mention several negative perceptions that developed about women in early Indian literature. The innate nature of women was represented as sinful, and according to several early Indian texts, women have been sinful right from the beginning. Women are the edge of a razor, or they have been compared to poisonous snakes and fire, all rolled into one, with the habit of lying, sitting around, and an indiscriminate love of ornaments, full of anger, treachery and also bad habits and conduct. So, in order to control such a negative personality of a woman, what it was considered most essential was to take recourse to violence. So, there are several incidences and Jatak Kathas, contemporary narrative, who have kind of declared openly that in order to control this kind of a wayward nature of women, it is very important to resort to violence to keep them in order. And hence, we see that by describing women as sinful, it was kind of a stamp that was given to violent behavior towards women, and then there was no end to that process. They were considered as adulterous by nature and permanently on a lookout for pleasure in life. So, therefore, the husband had a right to control them by using the stick and by hitting them publicly. Ancient lawgivers warned that women must be closely guarded day and night, regardless of their age, to preserve the purity of offspring and to preserve the purity of caste. So, having discussed all these important factors, I think we have now a fairly clearer understanding about the problem that has been historical as well as has been continuing in the contemporary times. Thank you.